hour. So we, in the interest of time, I think we'll go ahead. And I want to thank Tracy for, actually, this was her idea to start this series, and I think it's a really good idea. Something much more informal than we've been doing in the past, and I like that opportunity. We met with Dominique will know, we met with some of the folks earlier this week, and that's really what it was. It was a conversation. It was amazing. I think we got a lot out of it. So really hope for that for this series as well. We might have, I think maybe we might have one or two unfamiliar faces here. Maybe one, maybe not. But just to introduce ourselves. So I'm going across the screen. Sorry, Tracy Campbell, who is our coordinator and does the hard slogging to keep us honest. And on my right, David Hofmann, who is the co-lead for the network. And I'm Barb Perry, one of the co-leads as well at Ontario Tech, also director of the Center on Hate, Bias, and Extremism, and newly minted a UNESCO chair in hate studies. So this is an experiment for us, and I'm glad that we actually have familiar folks in the audience. It'll be a little less intimidating that way. So our plan is really for this to be a conversation, a dialogue, not for us to talk at you. I think pretty much all of you now know what the network is about, the kind of work that we're doing in terms of trying to sort of peel back the layers and peel back the veil and see what the risk is in CAF in terms of hateful conduct as well as right-wing extremism, sort of up the continuum a little bit, if you will. I don't think we really had many points of talking points that we wanted to share. I think really one of the things that we were emphasizing, we were actually trying to think of questions to raise for you. But any comments, any questions that you have, we're happy to answer those as well. And I think there are two that come to the fore and I think are most important. I don't know which one to ask. One is practical and one is sort of more philosophical. So let's ask this one first, and that is I guess maybe our raison d'etre for us and for those of you, I know many of you are also working in this space within DND and outside DND. But one of the reasons that we're taking this deep dive, one of the reasons that many of us are looking in this space is because of that concern of threats to national security that might be posed by engagement with right-wing extremism or hateful conduct within the confines and context of the CAF. So I think that what I would sort of like to throw out there is just to get your thoughts on what is the risk. Why do we think about that nexus in particular? And question out there is, what are the risks to national security that are associated with having folks engaged in right-wing extremism or more broadly hateful conduct within the CAF? Why are we concerned about that?
Maybe even a twist without losing the original question is, what are you folks concerned with as well? And the idea here is just to get the conversation going and the blood flowing.
Maybe a couple points on that.
Yeah.
Hoffman, I forgot your first name. Unbelievable.
Hoffman's fine. Hey, you.
What was your first name? Sorry.
David.
Yeah, David. Yeah. This is Ali Disboni from RMC. Listen, couple points just to keep the ball rolling for others to comment. To the point of your questions and Barbara's question is, for example, from the perspective of radicalization, armed forces, the concern, the worries about the civilian oversight over military institutions. That's the first point. Second is security institutions in Canada represent the Canadian values, civil society values. So that's another concern there. To what extent we see security forces, institutions represent Canadian general values, or they are a bit, how you say that, sectioned or sectarian or part of society. The third point I had in mind is that operation, domestic or international security operation. The question of, introducing the personal value judgment and chain of authority and stuff like that. There's some other point I can't remember now. I'm just talking to you from what my recollection of the readings of the literature, especially the latest one was very well done, actually. Anyway, yeah, those 3 points. Yeah, go ahead, over to you.
Oh, they're great.
Yeah, no, I think, well, and I think the things that we've been focusing on in particular is, the extent to which CAF is, meant to be not just a representative, but, is upholds, Canadian, our core values that include, respect for diversity, inclusion, all of those sorts of pieces, as well as the operations piece. What is the threat of a risk of a loose cannon going off in, whether it's domestically or in a combat situation as well. So those are, I think, have been really at the forefront of our thinking in this space.
Even with what's happened recently with the Freedom Convoy and the media cycle that's been around that, it was concerning, and it obviously crossed our radar when we heard back that there's JTF members who are apparently leading out here in Atlantic Canada. One of the big, I guess, quote unquote, new concerns is Diagolon. I mean, their leader is Jeremy McKenzie in Nova Scotia, who's a 17-year combat veteran. And just watching some of his videos, this is something he touts and uses all the time in a very American, in kind of the veneration of the military that's part of American culture. He mimics it. I'm a veteran of 17 years, therefore my opinion is so much more important than everyone else's. And it's all part of this interesting narrative that even in events that I mean, thankfully there wasn't the levels of violence that could have erupted with the Freedom Convoy. These ties to the military keep cropping up and undoubtedly are causing harm in terms of optics, in terms of public confidence, and these are absolutely things on our radar. And the problem is, Dr. Perry and I are both outsiders looking in, and it's nice to hear from the D&D scientists and the enlisted folks about allowing us to write our course and focus on the interesting things. So thank you, Ali. Those were interesting points.
Yeah, the credibility is really important there, I think, in terms of, in this broader context where what we're seeing is an erosion of trust in key institutions. And, when we see these highly publicized cases, I think it extends then to the military as well. Lisa, what do you have to say? I feel like a call-in radio host or something.
Lisa, you're on with Barb and David on.
I guess you're referring to me. Is that me? Is that
yes.
who you're? Okay,
yes.
Hi. So yeah, my name is Lisa and I am new to all this. I actually thought that this was for something else, but you piqued my interest because I'm currently a lecturer with Ontario Tech. So that's how I found out about this. So I am really interested in just listening at this point. I don't have any particular questions, but I do feel in general, I think we have to be more civically engaged. I think I'm wondering about that in general, if that is, something that's in the research you're finding that people are more apathetic, or maybe it's less. I don't know. I just feel like there's a huge disconnect given the pandemic, just this whole idea of the places that we would maybe normally socialize and be out and be in general. And I think that really impacts how we interpret the world around us. So I think I'm curious about that. And yeah, but I'm definitely just listening. So I don't know if anything that I've said is helpful or impactful or.
Can I be Socratic for a second? When you say we need to be civically engaged, who do you mean by we?
I don't know. I think if I'm thinking about how we consume maybe media, if I think about how we consume conversations, random conversations that I hear, I think too, like being connected to history, I think being connected to the stories of the people that we know. I'm kind of sort of talking in a arced kind of way, I suppose. But I think I don't know. Does that answer your question? Sort of, David, does that answer your question?
I was just trying to get a little bit more specificity, but nope, that's fine. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly resonates with a lot of what we saw during the convoys as well. And I think that, it does, and you mentioned history too, right? And one of the pieces that we're trying to get at, even in the context of this project, are the historical contours associated with hateful conduct within the context of the military. But one of the things that really came to the fore during the convoy was not just civic engagement, but civic awareness. Right. And I mean, the level of ignorance of the Constitution and the Charter and the status of the Bill of Rights, for example, I mean, drawing on talk about your sovereign citizens, right? Drawing on, American legal traditions to make Canadian arguments was just absurd. So I think there have been actually, in this very short period of time, a lot of conversations about, what can we do to enhance that civic awareness and understanding of core political institutions. So yeah, I think it's a very important point. Stefan?
Without sounding elitist, sorry, just jumping on your comment, Barb. I think there's a correlation between that ignorance and this participation in these types of movements. Not to say that there aren't law scholars and highly educated individuals who aren't trying to benefit from the unrest or in one way or another. I mean, there's without naming names, I mean, there's prominent scholars out there who make their livelihood off of self-help and with alt-right tones. That being said, the point that Barb was making, just the lack of civic ignorance amongst the participants is poignant. But what also struck me as interesting is the lack of civic interest amongst just general Canadians. I know this sounds super elitist, and I apologize, but what shocked me is the amount of when they were doing some of those Gallup polls, is the amount of Canadians who supported the convoy, just because some of the odd ideas sounded interesting. Oh, freedom sounds good. Maybe I'll support it. Or oh, they want. I'm tired of wearing masks too. Maybe I'll support them, with being completely ignorant of some of the more dangerous aspects of this movement. And I think it's from where this is something that we as scholars need to be, and you as practitioners, I think we just need to be a little bit more engaged in understanding some of these, not only the extremists themselves within and around the movement, but these wider this is the sociologist in me talking, the wider socio context in which these groups emerge and draw support. And to me, that was a big wake-up call. I mean, it's been on my radar for a while, but it shocked me, just the amount of civic ignorance of like what 1/3 of Canadians, 40% of Canadians at one point. And it goes back to what Ali was saying with some of the civilian aspects with this CF. But I'm yammering at this point. I'll cede the floor.
Stefan?
Yeah, a couple of points. Interesting discussions so far. I guess I'll work in reverse order, because it seems like these arguments, like it's like there's the civic side and awareness that you're bringing up, but I think that it goes even a little bit deeper. This is international. We have arguments flowing in the internet that cross borders back and forth very freely from group to group. And so that really feeds it. Like when you see the rise of these extremist groups that's taking place, a lot of it is really fueled by being able to connect in ways that weren't possible a few decades ago, like being able to just go online and find, people who share your beliefs, or else find things that get you, like that kind of coerce you to believe in a particular ways in some occasions. So there's that part. The other point I was going to make is about the impact on the military of these stories as they hit the media of like right-wing participation of military members. I think it erodes the trust in the military, as you said, but it's also as an impact on military members themselves, because they read the story and they might have to answer when family and friends talk about it, or it could just impact on their pride in the institution in general, especially if their unit is being named as one where this has occurred. So the impact, like I think that the military members, like they're Canadian citizens just like everyone else, and they have like all these things has an impact on them, and we feel those repercussions as we go along, or at least we will. Thank you all. Those are the 2 points I wanted to make.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point that you make about the impact on those serving. We think about the sort of outward looking, but we don't. I think again, as outsiders, we don't necessarily think about the impact that it has internally. I mean, I just can't imagine the kinds of conversations that people must be having again in the aftermath of the convoys, having seen so much activity there associated with former military personnel. So yeah, I think that it must be disturbing to some folks. What else? What are other, yeah, David.
Sorry, Barb, just riffing off your idea, and I'd be interested in hearing what the audience has to think. I mentioned it with the leader of Diagolon as well, but whenever these members seem to crop up and get our attention, they seem to be immensely proud of their military service, and that tends to be at the forefront of how they're selling themselves to some of these right-wing groups. And I mean, this is a topic that Barb and I and other scholars have explored, but I'd find it very interesting, and I'd be interested in the audience's insight. How do enlisted members feel about this co-opting of I would say co-opting of military honor, or the twisting of military honor when it comes to these rogues or these veterans, and to reiterate, as Barb said, as outsiders who've never served ourselves, I mean, this would be this type of insight would be fascinating. But if anyone feels brave enough or gracious enough to chime in.
I'm sensing a series of questions, or maybe a second study for the next phase of the network. Stefan, go ahead.
Yeah, just I think that it's I would flag here that military members are a cross section of society. And so when you're saying, well, how would military members feel? Well, you're going to have some people standing up and applauding and other people being appalled, and everything in between would probably be what I would expect to happen. Like there are going to be individuals who are very supportive of, say, participation in the Freedom Convoy, or whatever example you want to use. As examples get more extreme, there's going to be less and less people who are applauding, but
applauding openly.
Yeah, well, yeah, but as a cross section of society, we have to expect, just like there will be individuals who engage in hateful conduct who are a part of these groups who are the military. Well, that does happen because, again, cross section of Canadian society, and they're going to be there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that actually links to one of the questions that's been, I think, on our mind since the get-go, in terms of methodology, is how certain we are that people are going to be forthcoming, both in terms of identifying others that they think, I don't mean identifying, but saying that they are aware of folks who are expressing these sorts of sentiments or some sympathy for the far right, and the next level, folks, how comfortable people would be or willing they're going to be when we get to the survey component, where it's self-report, to indicate that they have sympathy with these sorts of perspectives. I mean, when you're dealing with, sort of criminological issues generally, there's a that sort of social acceptability caveat that we have to keep in mind when asking people. So that has been one of the questions I think at the forefront of our mind, and I wonder, yeah, Stefan, go ahead.
Sorry, I don't want to dominate here, so I'll stop after this one. But this is just right on topics that I've been thinking a lot about. And one of the things that we can expect to happen if you're talking to people about it is on the topic is some individuals may not recognize or may not identify it as participating in like an extremist group or whatever. For example, like I used this example on the weekend when I was talking about this exact topic. You have individuals on Facebook who may share a meme. Hey, it's funny, it's anti-Trudeau or whatever, but it's Genesis in a right, like one of the extreme right groups. And so they're not necessarily, behind everything that the group is behind, but they just find this one thing funny. And these groups are actually very good at putting out stuff like that to generate support, as we know. But the other side to it too is that if it's, say, a person that they're working with, the person is, say, hey, you want to come out to this meeting or whatever, and they might say, well, I wasn't interested in the meeting, but he's a good guy, raises funds for kids camp and stuff like that. Like, how could he possibly be a part of an extremist group? And so there could be this definitional component. We do see this in criminology all the time, where individuals may be seeing something, but they're not defining in the same way that our legislation or our policy defines it, at least not consistently.
Yeah, that's why, the questions need to be crafted in a way that you're getting at not the broad sorts of language, like, do you know someone who's involved in the right wing, but that is engaging in XYZ behaviors that are indicators, right? So it's all about how we operationalize that. Yeah. Ali?
Yeah, sorry guys, if my comment is a bit out of step with the line of conversation. Yeah, to quote the German philosopher Immanuel Kant, who is in mood for philosophy now at 3 p.m. But anyway, quickly, he said, what can I know? What can I know? What can I do? What can I hope for? So I think our job is, as you guys are well aware, is that what can we know about them? What about us? Because I don't like this idea of us and them, because it's the society and the whole interaction and the systemic thing of it. So, so we need to know about them. In that mindset, first point, I'm going to finish on this: social movement or a determined, clear group. To what extent Freedom Convoy was a social movement? A bit going to what Stefan was saying, disparate elements, conspiracy, extremism, others inviting to violence, normal people, sympaths, and all that. So that's the job we have to do, to separate the social movement part of it, like Le Carré Rouge à Montréal, it was a social movement, but has nothing to do with Freedom Convoy. That was something else. That was just a sociology example. And also people who are determined, like, ISIS and others, very infamous examples. Sorry, I dropped those names here. Is just, what you're dealing with, right? And there is a gray zone. So we need to know what's happening first. And also in that spirit, I think some of these guys, that's a very dangerous thing to say. Please don't take it as like a kind of it's more, as Max Weber was saying, a methodological empathy. and not a sympathy, is that to understand the anger, frustration, and what's happening. What part of it is, yeah, criminal, law, order, all those points are right. But in terms of understanding, what is this anger come from? What is that? Is it rooted in the Afghan-Iraq military operation? It is this social polarization. Is it like personal frustration in their own relationship? Is it the hatred of some other natures? Over to you.
With Weber, it's
Yes.
Weber's. I appreciate you bringing up Weber. I always think of Weber when I do any sort of empirical research, particularly. I know he uses this word, but objectivity is at the core of what we do, and Barb, I'm sure Barb agrees, although I don't want to speak for her. We don't have to agree with what these folks are saying, but we're trying to suss out and needle away at the who, what, when, where, and why. Yeah, it's a difficult thing to put yourself in these folks' shoes, particularly if I mean I'm a member of one of the groups they target, and I've had conversations with some of these people where they've denied my humanity to my face, and it's tough at times, but I think it's something that all the members in the research group are doing and attempting to underpin our research. So I just appreciate your I'm very Weberian myself, so I appreciate that comment. But sorry, Barb, I kind of cut you off there.
I forgot where I was going with that, so that's okay. So Phil had some comments in the chat, and I think, can everyone see the chat? Or is that just for have we all been promoted to panelists? So you can see that, that he has some comments and some questions about where, okay, you can all see it, about where we see the activism, and I think that's one of the pieces that we really want to do our best to suss out. I mean, I think there was an assumption, as you say, Phil, that a lot of this is happening at the, at sort of the lower ranks. But if we think about some of the folks who have been involved post-military career, they've, some of them, as they said, they're 10 years in, they're 17 years in. So these are not necessarily people who have not, made it through the ranks in some respects, or not always at the lower ranks. But I think you're probably right. I think that there is maybe an overrepresentation, especially if we think about those who have enlisted, especially in the reserves, specifically to get the skills that they think that they'll be able to use when they come back to the movement. So I think that will be a fascinating piece of the research, to if we can get a sense of that distribution. The second part of your question, yeah, still I think, yeah. And I think the other part that's interesting here is, sort of the role of middle management, if you want to call them that, the middle ranks, in terms of being aware. And I think that's the first thing, right, we have to think about, is awareness and understanding of what the movement looks like, what some of the narratives are, what some of the memes are, and how they evolve, that sort of thing, so that they're in a position to intervene. They're in a position to identify problems as they're arising, rather than waiting for something, someone like a Patrick Matthews to emerge. So I think that that's sort of two sides. That's the research piece, but I think it's also about the work that needs to be done internally if you're going to confront this issue, to enhance awareness and understanding of the issue as well. Good point, Phil.
Who asked the question about what does freedom mean? I had this. I'm sorry. I had this discussion with my students just the other day, I mean that's always one of these poignant questions. I don't know if it's too far afield for this discussion, but
certainly a lot of journalists asked that question during the convoys. Yeah, it was a favorite question.
Nah,
And
it's-
well, but it is. I think it is. Is that what the military is intended to do? Especially when it's that traditional peacekeeping role that Canadians have played, right? To ensure the freedom not just of our own citizens, but citizens of other countries as well. So I think it is something that that resonates with military as well.
And it is interesting, Barbara, that two perspectives is one says, I lost my freedom. And the other says, no, I want to keep my freedom. You're trying to take it away from me.
You've touched on something important, incredibly important there. Well, no, this is what, Stefan brought up this idea of which is absolutely something we've observed for many years now of this transnational, international aspect of far right extremism that particularly in the case of Canada, that's trickling up from the United States, and this whole entire debate of freedom, when people are arguing about freedom, they're talking past each other because there's a fundamental misunderstanding of what freedom is, or rather the far right, or at least what I'm seeing with the far right extremists like the Freedom Convoy, they have they've taken the American idea of freedom, which is freedom to, whereas the Canadian idea of freedom is freedom from. And therefore, when you have people in Ottawa who are angry over the disruption, they want freedom from gun violence, from hunger, and et cetera. Whereas these people who have embraced these far right, particularly American far right ideology, are again misquoting. I had an individual quote to me directly that their Second Amendment rights were being violated. This was a Canadian, and it just shocked me. This is years ago. It shocked me to the core, and it goes back to this ignorant. But it's this American idea of freedom to versus freedom from, and the reason there's all this conflict is the far right wants one version of freedom.
Yes.
The rest of Canada wants another, and it's apples and oranges. So
You're right. The statue of the Sir John A. Macdonald in Kingston. When sometimes stuff happens and nothing happens on the moment, you kind of think that is okay. Well, nobody said anything. But it seems that in the Canadian passive-aggressive mode, sometimes they don't. I'm a bit like that too in my life. I don't say anything, and a couple of days after, I'm angry like a fireball.
Justin, what are you thinking?
someone muted him. We were threatening to mute him
Oh,
before.
he
So
got muted.
No,
Yeah.
sorry about that. I'm fumbling with my touch screen. Yeah, thanks, Barbara. So just wanted to come back to the point we were discussing a little bit earlier about former military members who you see engaged in some of these public displays. And I think Stefan is, I agree with him 100%. It is a cross section of Canadian society, so we have to bear that in mind. But this is more of my own kind of thinking in this space, and potentially thinking of possible research questions down the road. But a lot of the work we've done has focused on military identity development and the process of becoming a military member and what that means to them, and in some cases what threats to that identity may sort of, like how they react to that and so on. And so it strikes me that, like, this is for many members, this is very, very important. It's very deeply entrenched. And so I think that, and this is just me sort of hypothesizing, but for some members who leave the organization, it creates a gap, it creates a hole. And I'm just wondering, based on your expertise in the area around processes of radicalization, whether for those who leave organizations that they've devoted their lives to, such as the military, whether or not that might make them potential targets or even potentially vulnerable to
I think that's
these types of
definitely,
groups. So it's just food for thought. Like, this isn't, this is just Justin talking here. But anyway.
No, I think you're bang on, Justin. I think, as you know, very limited scholarship in this field generally, but that is seems to be one of the core findings that does emerge, in European and American scholarship as well, is that it does become it becomes another family, another context, another structure in which they find a familiar space. People who organize themselves in a very similar way. They transfer some of those, especially if there's a large cadre, like groups like Lemut that were begun by former military personnel, right? They structure their hierarchy according to what they knew from the military. They carry in some of the values around patriotism, around masculinity and hypermasculinity. They carry that over. So I think that is one of the things that we are, one of the few things that we do know is that it is a substitute, if you will, for the life and the identity that they knew as people serving in the military.
I think the most analogous literature that's out there on this topic, Justin, comes from criminology, particularly the literature on outlaw motorcycle gangs. And if people have studied the history of outlaw motorcycle gangs, the reason the Hells Angels and the Bandidos exist and where they came from was from World War II vets returning and essentially seeking the same sort of camaraderie, seeking the same sort of high-risk lifestyle and brotherhood and hierarchy that they had in the military, and they recreated it in these outlaw motorcycle gangs, and there's actually a pretty robust literature there, and I've been thinking more and more that there's a lot we can learn from that pre-existing literature. Obviously, it won't be completely analogous, but not everyone is going to find the same sort of meaning that outlaw motorcycle veterans find in outlaw motorcycle gangs. And we do, I mean, as all the D&D and military folks here know, that there are law-abiding motorcycle clubs populated by veterans. This is just a reality in Canada, and they're present, if not prolific. However, again, not everyone's going to find meaning in joining one of these outlaw groups, and there's going to be a small minority of people who find meaning in the more far-right oriented groups instead of the outlaw groups. But the processes of radicalization and joining are the same. It's just that last little step. Why would someone join a far-right group instead of an outlaw gang, instead of DACA, which is like or BACA, like Bikers Against Child Abuse, or some of these like quote unquote more pro-social groups, and I think that's one of the big challenges in the radicalization research, is that we're not 100% sure yet. But I'm becoming more and more convinced that the process is the same. It's just it's probably likely some sort of mixture of group dynamics and individual social psychological dynamics that are at play here, and we just haven't answered that $1 million question.
And what's available, right? Or what they're aware of, right? I mean, there are a lot of communities that don't have outlaw motorcycle gangs, but you can easily find your way into a far right group, right? Just online. It won't necessarily be in person. So, what are you aware of? And there might also be, it's a journey. I remember, in their first go around with the environmental scan project, one cop saying that people are trying on different coats till they find one that fits. So they might go through, they might make their way to the right wing from the military or from the biker gangs, or vice versa, or maybe into a drug gang or something. Some collective that gives them meaning.
Seeking behavior from the sociology of religion. There's so many areas that could cross-fertilize this. Sorry, Justin, I was interrupting.
Well, I just, I just wanted to clarify that, as somebody who has studied military identity development for a couple of years, I mean, the values that you see sort of being promoted by right-wing extremist groups are so antithetical to that process inside the organization. So your question is exactly right to me, like what changes, what switch flips. And so that's interesting. I do still have my copy of Daniel Wolf's Rebels.
That's one of the best reads. I always recommend that. It's so
it was taught in my methods course. So I understand where you're coming from with the analogy 100%, but so it is strange to consider what happens after the fact. And so I think there there are hard questions to be answered there. You know, and I would expect it's not just, as Stefan said, it's we also always with our internal research program think about the impact on the member, but as well impact on the member's family, the team, you know, the larger unit, and of course, as we've already alluded to, the public perception, trust in the institution. So
the leaving piece is something that's really important, and so that's why, you know, we're very interested to work with veterans as well as current service members to get their insights in that. And you know, and it's sort of their retrospective insights, but also, you know, what they're aware of amongst their peers who might have left at the same time or around the same time, that sort of thing. Because you know, I think one assumption is that they may be a little more open to sharing than folks who are currently serving.
Just a quick idea that I want to toss out there that I've been kind of cogitating on. You touched on a very important, well, I think is a pivotal question of the antithetical, the adoption of antithetical values that some of these groups have, and one thing that I always have to keep reminding myself, and it goes back to Ali's kind of objectivity point, is that these folks don't see themselves as villains. They see themselves as protectors. They see themselves as valorous champions, and to me that seems almost like an extension of a military identity, where one serves one country, where one puts up, where one puts familial friendship and other obligations, that they sacrifice them for this concept of serving one's country. And while it's sometimes very difficult to remember that, again, these folks see themselves as fighting the good fight. And I wonder how much, and I want to throw it out there just for people here to cogitate on or maybe comment on, but I wonder how much of we see those values as antithetical, but putting ourselves in their shoes, how much is it just them continuing what they've, at least in their own minds, continuing what they did before by, fighting the good fight. So, I mean, I think that whole antithetical approach is maybe the wrong, I mean, from the perspective of the perpetrators or the MOVE members, I think that might be the wrong way to go about it. But I hopefully made my points, and I'd be wondering what people thought.
Yeah, I think that circles back to Stefan's comment about how they make sense of these things and how they define the behaviors. So no, point taken for sure.
Yeah, and especially in the patriot/militia element of the far right. I mean, that is really the raison d'etre. That is, you know, if you look at their imagery, even, you know, they're often in military uniform or some copy, some facsimile of a military uniform, and you know, serving the country, patriotism, defense of the nation, all of that is, you know, part and parcel of their presentation of self. So yeah, I think it really is an important element to look at for them.
I mean, I don't think anything we've said here is new to most of our audience, but hopefully some of it will be interesting to anyone viewing this after the fact.
And I think it comes back to, I mean, this is part of the conversation we were having with Dominique and et al, if you will, earlier this week, last week, whenever, it's all blends together, where we're talking about, you know, the importance of gender in this context. I mean, obviously it's at the fore when you're talking about the sexual assault problems across the military, but we have to also consider the role that gender plays here in terms of the construction of masculinity, hyper-masculinity, toxic masculinity that's part of the far right, that sort of becomes hardened and I think further entrenched within the movement. And there is, again, when they're recruiting, not necessarily people who have come from the military and sort of move of their own accord, but when far right groups are recruiting, these are the assumptions that they have about the folks, that they are like-minded, that they share, you know, misogynistic views, for example, or if not misogynistic, at least, you know, sort of hyper masculine identities. So you have to look at it from a recruiter perspective as well, as what is the appeal of folks with military experience.
I think Stefan has raised his hand again, or was that Stefan, were you lowering your hand?
Yeah, no, I raised it just to, you know, just to build on that point. I mean, it's not surprising that people, even from these groups, will see themselves as heroic figures. Like, no one is gonna go all in on a cause and say, I'm doing it because I'm a shithead. You know, like it doesn't tend to work that way. Like, people will cast themselves as heroes.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it, at least, you know, in the contemporary, I'm sure it's played out in different ways in different ages, but it seems like reactionary, like we've gone too far. We're way too inclusive, too many immigrants in the country. Why are there women in the military? Why is there's all this, you know, wishy-washy, namby-pamby stuff when we should be doing this instead? And we're fighting the good fight to bring it back to this old mythological, you know, way that things were, and that is always seems to be better. Like, there's always this call to the past that you see within these groups.
Yeah, there's an analogy in the work that other space I work in, which is around hate crime, and the way law enforcement responds to hate crime very often as, you know, sort of being PC run amok, and there's great resistance to it because, you know, it privileges certain categories of victims over others, and you know, that can be, you know, a foundation. In the context of all of these other things that I think is wrong with policing being too soft, it can be one of the foundations for then looking for, you know, a more appropriate, or from their perspective, a better approach to, you know, the other, which is, you know, exclusion. Okay, well, we've got just a few minutes left, so I'm going to I'm going to take over the floor here just to ask another question, which is much more pragmatic, and that is, you know, we have a few of you here. If you could give us, you know, what would be your idea moving forward? What kinds of questions, what kinds of issues would you like to see sort of center these more informal conversations as we move forward? And Tracy's taking notes.
And we can highlight some of the expertise of maybe some of our, I mean, Tracy's been doing a great job of doing that in the chat, but our network has, I think the strength of the network is not only are we covered from coast to coast, but we've brought in people who have a variety of different perspectives, a variety of different histories when it comes to serving with the CAF. We have legal experts, we have cybersecurity experts, we have experts in the somewhat analogous but somewhat different Quebecois far-right context. So there's I think we're pretty covered
the
on
online space as well,
yeah.
Which is not something we've talked much about, but
No,
I think
but we're interested in what, at least in the short term, what people are hungry for us to cover, and this will inform how we proceed with these talks.
Mm-hmm. And it need not be, you know, something specific to CAF, but again, you know, a sort of broader conversation to help inform your internal conversations, a broader conversation about, you know, the far right, different elements of the far right.
One question comes to mind quickly is that the driver to radicalization in military forces, is it an indigenous process or is more impacted with what's happening out of military institution? And it spills over to the military, or the military has by itself some socialization processes that create rather than reflect the radicalization from the society. I hope it's clear the way I phrased it. Yeah,
I think the short answer is both.
Pathways, yeah.
Yeah, there's both, but I mean, that could be a discussion. That'd be an interesting discussion. There's been tentative steps of empirical work in this area, as far as I know, but really, it's within the particular case of the Canadian Armed Forces, or I don't think there's actually been any substantial empirical work on this type of radicalization. But again, from what we're seeing with chatter, it's both. There's this fetishization of far right amongst the far right of military culture. I mean, just look at any of these paramilitary and militia groups and the images they use, as well as I mean, we'd be remiss to not recognize that there's institutional dynamics here. Sorry, go ahead.
David, quickly, for the future discussions, it just crossed my mind that this Russian invasion of Ukraine, I didn't have time to follow the comments online from the extreme right group. I'm very curious to know how they position themselves.
Yeah. The far right convoy groups, the far right convoy groups, or the Ottawa convoy groups, many of them have turned to from peddling in anti-mandate to pro-Russia. And so, I mean, this goes into another observation that we've noticed just with the far right in general is the undertone of anti-authority or you know, anti-government seems to be the common thread. They'll jump from one issue to the next. And now it's this some of these freedom convoy groups. The narrative is about how Putin is really buying into all this far right QAnon, very American QAnon rhetoric. I mean, some of the stuff I've seen is that Putin is really secretly invading Ukraine in order to stop biolabs that are being used by Democrats to harvest. I mean, it sounds funny, but in a global child trafficking ring to harvest, you know, adrenochrome, which is whatever. So I mean, not all, obviously they aren't monolithic, but there's been a shift with some of these groups to the next, and then once this is over, there'll be a shift to the next.
What's next?
Yeah. And
there's
I think that'd be
tension spans. Yeah, it's like squirrel.
That's exactly what it is.
But
I mean,
the irony, of course, is that they were pillaring, you know, Trudeau for being a communist, and that we were now living in a communist society, and yet they're pro-Russian.
I mean, Barb and I, when we first started working, together, we were doing work on sovereign citizens and freemen on the land, and some of the folks we interviewed there at the time were, you know, held center-left views, even though they were freemen on the land and pseudo-legal, and it was all fascinating them to see them around 2016 to suddenly just take a hard far-right shift to pro-Trump, and then a shift to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, and I think that was an eye-opening moment. But that's something interesting we could talk about is maybe the
morphing.
Yeah, or
well, they continue to make themselves relevant, right? They twist their narratives to keep themselves relevant, depending on, you know, the crisis du jour.
And I think it's part of that heroic
they're
narrative.
Masterful at it. Yeah.
Do you think it's the heroic narrative
with kind of just sort of behavioral trends in social media today? Sort of this ideological opportunism, right? You're just jumping onto the next thing so that you can be heard and gain a platform.
Yeah,
I think
individually and collectively.
Samuel Tanner might be able to speak to that a little bit. Area of expertise related to this area, and would like to come forth and talk about what you're doing and how it's related to either directly or tangentially to what this network is doing. Please use us as a platform. Let us help amplify your voice and get your conversations going.
Yeah, and please do spread the word as well amongst your colleagues that, you know, it's an open forum, an open table, and you know, if anyone in your networks has an idea of a question or a conversation they might like to have in this context, or, you know, if you know, Dominique, I'm thinking of the work that you're doing, you know, if ever you want to have sort of a roundtable, open house, a discussion where you raise some of the questions that you're looking at, I think this would be a great, and we talked about that, you know, in our meeting, that this would be a great forum for that, for getting that conversation going. So absolutely, we will be expecting to see you on screen.
Yes, I'll be in touch shortly.
and that includes if you have any senior graduate students who are engaged in original empirical work. I mean, this could be an interesting forum for them to toss around ideas as well. So sky's the limit.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Tracy, for making this happen. And thanks to all of you.